The crowd started booing him and didn't let him get a word out. The crowd started jeering at him, right? This is a crowd of Democrats, right? Just like booing this Democratic politician and not letting him speak, not letting him get a word in until he said on the mic, "I will not prosecute abortions in the city of New Orleans."
Welcome to Fight Back Radio, production of fightbacknews.org, taking you to the heart of the people's struggle. I'm your host, Richard Berg, and welcome to Pride 2023 at Fight Back Radio. We're celebrating Pride Month, which is all of June, and we have a special guest for you today on Fight Back Radio that I think you'll really enjoy. But I want to encourage people before we get into the interview that since we're in the month of June, to go to a Pride parade to celebrate who you are, especially if you're LGBTQ, and be proud of that. And remember where Pride comes from. I mean, it has its roots in Stonewall, which is something that everybody here should know about. If you don't, go check out that history. But also I want to encourage people to go back and remember people like Leslie Feinberg or Harry Hay, or people who were leaders in this struggle, to remember the history of where we've come from and how this the struggle for pride has evolved over time. And we should remember our martyrs as well, people like Harry Milk or Harvey Milk, or Matthew Shepard, or the people who lost their lives because of who they are. And this kind of repression continues, and it continues in a deep wave by the far right. And our guest today, Serena Sojic-Borne, will talk about that. And she's a leader in the fight in the Deep South against some of the far right moves. She's from New Orleans. She's a working class leader and has led a unionization of the Starbucks, the second Starbucks to be unionized in New Orleans. But also, she's a leader of a very important organization in New Orleans called the Real Name Campaign. And so I encourage people to check out that, especially if you're in the New Orleans area. But organizing people against some of this, don't say gay kind of stuff, banning books in libraries. And, Serena has done all of this, and she'll talk about it a little bit in our interview here. So I encourage you to go back also and check out one of our previous Fight Back Radio episodes. We had Eliza Schultz on, who's a Teamster who was talking and a leader in the caucus of the LGBTQ caucus of the Teamsters, and was talking to a UPS driver. So listen to this episode, then go back and listen to that one. Serena's a socialist, and so she talks about that and how her socialism brings her to be a working class leader and an LGBTQ leader. She just returned from a visit to Cuba, and you'll hear her talk about that as well. So here she is, Serena Sojic-Borne. So I'm here with Serena Sojic-Borne. Welcome to Fight Back Radio, Serena.
Hey, Richard. Love Fight Back Radio. So glad to be on.
Oh, it's great to have you. It's great to have you. So you're an activist with the Real Name campaign in New Orleans, Louisiana. Could you tell our Fight Back Radio listeners what is the Real Name campaign and what do they actually do?
Sure. So Real Name Campaign is an organization that fights for women and LGBTQ rights in Louisiana and in New Orleans. We're based in New Orleans, and we believe in building a mass movement to fight for these rights. So that means not necessarily relying on the politicians or lobbying politicians, but taking people, not that we're against doing those things, but primarily we believe that change happens by taking people out into the streets.
So, and you've confronted politicians, right? The governor of Louisiana, around some of these different bills that have come up, the Don't Say Gay. Could you talk a little bit about some of the legislation that that your campaign has taken up, and how that has worked? How does that look on the ground?
Sure. So, the Louisiana legislature has been putting out bill after bill that targets LGBTQ people, and abortion rights, for that matter. This past legislative session, and for the past several years since Trump was defeated in 2020. It's basically it's part of their backlash against our movement. They're trying to erase the gains of the LGBTQ community, and erase the gains of the women's movement. We have a Republican dominated legislature, both in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, and they're considering right now a ban on transgender medical care. They're considering a ban on the use of correct pronouns and correct names in classrooms. As a matter of fact, the way the bill is set up, a teacher has to use the pronouns that reflective of a child's gender on their birth certificate, and the names that's reflective of what's on the child's birth certificate. And if the child can only get out of this with a parental note, and even if the child brings in a parental note, the teacher can claim a religious exemption to the parental note. So this is
so the teacher can say, even if the parent does agree and writes a note, the teacher can say, I'm not going to do that because my religion says I got to call you by something that you don't want to be called.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Oh my
exactly.
God. Oh my God.
Yeah, and there's, so besides that, so the ban on transgender medical care, there's also different book bans. So there's a bill that requires kids who go to the library to get special library cards that only allow them to check out books from the juvenile section. And then at the same time as this bill is being pushed forward, we have conservative politicians, the attorney general included, who are putting out lists of books that should not be in the juvenile section. And all of them are in some way related to sex education or LGBTQ themes. And these are books that kids need to feel a sense of, LGBTQ kids need to feel a sense of belonging and feel a sense of like that their identity is out there, that they're not alone, and these bills are being taken away from these kids. Besides that, we do have our own version of Florida's Don't Say Gay bill, which is a bill that prohibits the discussion of gender identity or sexuality in classrooms.
I mean, tell me if I'm wrong. It seems like they're trying to erase, the LGBTQ from the school, from youth. That they're trying to say you don't exist, and rather than affirm and make people feel proud of who they are, make them ashamed or whatever. Is that right? Is that the goal here, or what's going on?
Yeah, no, they're definitely going after LGBTQ kids. They know it's a vulnerable target. They know they can influence right-wing parents to be afraid that something's going to happen to their kid. And so they know that this is something, they know this is political red meat for them. They're going after LGBTQ kids, and they want them to be completely erased from society, because they don't want any idea related to any sense of being LGBTQ to even come up for a child in school.
So, and it sounds like they went all out. There's like Bill F. You've named several bills right there that are going through. Now, you said there's a Democratic governor. How has he reacted to this? Has he been an ally? It's John Bel Edwards, I think, right? Am I correct?
Yeah. So John Bel Edwards is a conservative Democrat. He's anti-abortion, and he's been pretty wishy-washy on LGBTQ issues. So the governor has pretty consistently been telling people that he supports LGBTQ kids, but he's never, what we want from him is to commit to vetoing all anti-LGBTQ bills, and that's well within his power to do that. He hasn't come out and made a commitment. And last year, he actually allowed an anti-trans bill, a ban on trans girls playing sports to come into law.
Can you talk about that bill a little bit and how that played out?
I'll actually go back 2 years. It's a pretty good story of how this governor is dealing with the LGBTQ movement. So 2 years ago, this was in 2021, the Republicans in the legislature put forward 2 anti-LGBTQ bills. Actually, these were specifically anti-trans bills. So one bill was targeting the ability of transgender kids to get gender-affirming care. It was saying kids can't get gender-affirming care without both parents' consent, right? Which in the state of Louisiana, you generally don't need consent, like parental consent, to get medical care if you're a child. And the other bill would say that trans girls couldn't participate in women's sports, right? Which is basically it's based on this misunderstanding of trans girls, this idea that that hormones wouldn't impact like their physical ability, or the idea that, they should be, that they're inherently always going to, even without hormones, they're inherently always going to be better at sports than other girls, which is, it's not really backed by science when you like look into it. For a lot of people, that's counterintuitive, but there's no like scientific consensus that trans girls would somehow be better at sports than other girls. So it's really just this idea that like we need to be targeting trans girls. We need to be making them look like they're a threat to the safety of cis girls, and we need to be pushing them like to be totally erased and to be totally apart from the rest of the kids. Right? It encourages bullying and encourages discrimination. So that was in 2021. These 2 bills came out, and we fought them really hard. So we came out into the streets. We protested for Trans Day of Visibility. We had hundreds of people out into the streets. And for anyone who's not familiar with like the state legislative process, these bills have to be introduced by a legislator. They're co-authored by different legislators, and then they go into a committee. Like if it's a bill about healthcare, it goes to the health committee. Then if it goes past that committee, then it goes to one of the chambers. So it's House Representative and the Senate, just like, pretty much every state and the federal government. And if it gets through both chambers with a majority, it goes to the governor. The governor is able to veto the bill. And if the governor vetoes it, the chambers can override that veto with a 2/3 majority. Now, the override is really important because in Louisiana, Republicans have a 2/3 majority of the Senate, and they're very close to a 2/3 majority in the House. So 1 or 2 Democrats flip to the Republican side, and the Republicans win and can get whatever they want, right? So these 2 bills in 2021 went into committees. They even went to some of them even went to, there was 2 versions of each bill. So some of these bills even went to full chamber votes, and we fought very hard to push them back, and we managed to defeat 3 out of the 4 bills, right? And so there was 1 copy of the sports ban left. It went through both chambers. And so the Republicans.
So the other 3 bills. I'll let you go there in a second.
Sure,
but
yeah.
You defeated them actually in these Republican-controlled House and Senate, so they didn't get to the governor's desk.
Right. So we defeated the other 3 in committee. So the committee is the one time you can come out and you can say your piece against the bills. And so we basically brought out, in total, between everything, hundreds of people to these committees and to protests outside of them. And lots of organizations worked on this together to make sure that the politicians saw like how unpopular these bills were.
Oh, good work! Congratulations on that. But let's go to the troublesome bill that passed both houses.
Sure. Yeah. So this transports ban, right, passed both houses. It was actually co-authored by a Democrat, and it wasn't just any Democrat. It was the vice chair of the Louisiana Democratic Party. His name was C. Travis Johnson. He co-authored this bill along with a Republican senator, right? And so this bill went to the governor's desk, but because the legislative session is a specific amount of time and the governor has 10 days to veto, it just didn't work out that they weren't able to, he vetoed it, but they weren't able to get to overriding the veto, right? They had a 2/3 majority in both houses. They had Democrats voting for this bill. They had many Democrats, actually the majority of Democrats either voted for the bill or abstained. And so this bill had bipartisan support in Louisiana. But the clock ran out. So what happened afterwards is the Republicans a month later called for a special veto override session. And a veto override session is something that hasn't been done since Louisiana's constitution 50 years ago. It was historic, and it cost $1 million in taxpayer money. And the only reason they did it was to push forward this bill, the transgender sports ban, because they didn't have time to veto it to override the veto in the first session.
Oh,
so
that's terrible.
Yeah. So they called together this session. So and a lot of people expected the veto override to go through, right? Because it had 2/3 majority, but they do have to come together and vote again to veto, to override the veto. So what we did, I actually wasn't there. I helped plan the action, but I actually wasn't there at the time because I was having surgery. But what we did is we had a couple people stand on a balcony during the veto override session. And when they opened the veto override session to hear this bill, we dropped a banner that read "Defend Trans Youth" and chanted. And the security actually pushed these people out. They grabbed them and pushed them against the marble. They groped some of them, and they shoved people out of the Capitol. But everyone saw it. The media took pictures. Every single head in the entire legislative chamber turned to see this banner that said "Protect Trans Youth." And then the next minute, C. Travis Johnson, the Democrat who I had mentioned earlier, who helped co-author this bill, he got swarmed by 6 of his colleagues, Democratic colleagues. The media caught this. And they started, furiously discussing with each other, what are we going to do? And then the next day, every single Democrat in both the House of Representatives and the Senate, I think it was every single Democrat minus one, something like that, voted to sustain the governor's veto. Right. So this Democratic Party, where only a minority supported us at first, switched to being fully behind us. And the point that I always try to make here is that Democrats don't fight for us until we fight them to make them, because they're not these Democrats were not putting up a fight in any kind of way until there was a popular movement. And I don't want to just put the emphasis on the banner drop, but with the banner drop came phone calls, came emails, came mass protests in the streets. The banner was just the most visible thing to the media, but it was hundreds of people who were proving that these bills were unpopular and who were making sure that they wouldn't go through.
Oh, that's fabulous. Congratulations. I mean, it's, and I think you're right. I mean, it's like the Democrats, they tend to be spineless. The Republicans are hardcore our enemies, and the Democrats are only with us when we make them be with us, for the most part. There might be a couple of exceptions, but not very many. That's my perception as well. But I mean, could you talk a little bit though about some of the other things that you went through some of these bills, but can you talk about the organizing around it? I know you've I was talking to you before we went on the air here about Ben Franklin High School and some of the youth organizing that's went on around this, where you brought and not just youth, also you mentioned it's a broad coalition that that the Real Name campaign has been able to work with to try to defeat some of these things. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, just to finish the point from earlier, because why we brought this up is because last year the governor actually did let this bill pass into law. He didn't put his signature on it, so that was his claim of opposing it. But he let it pass into law, and he was being spineless about it last year, and at that point, that's when, like you mentioned, the youth were also getting involved, because last year there were so many more anti-trans and anti-LGBTQ bills. In particular, there was the Don't Say Gay bill, which was the ban on teachers bringing up gender identity, sexual orientation in schools. And so when this bill came out, 3 high schools in the New Orleans area walked out. There were other high schools in other parts of Louisiana, I believe, that had walkouts. And we all marched in the street together downtown the evening after the walkouts.
So the issue here was the Don't Say Gay, the being able to teach sex education in a more holistic way.
Yeah, no, actually, so it's not even, so sex education is prohibited in Louisiana. Already. So this isn't, I actually, when I was in high school, we had a STD wheel where, you roll the wheel and it lands on an STD and you have to guess what the solution to it is. And the correct answer every time was abstinence. So it's a very easy game. And that was our entire sex education.
Oh my God.
Right. And I mean, I went to a, pretty progressive school, right? But it's just illegal in Louisiana to have sex education. So the Don't Say Gay bill is worse. It's saying that teachers can't say, like, if there's a teacher who's transgender, they can't say that they're transgender. They can't mention anything about anyone being gay. They just, like, there's like a gag order basically on everything LGBTQ related. Right. And so these students at Ben Franklin High School and other high schools, we had the Willow School too, just walked out and or rallied. And for most of them, it's the first time they've ever been involved in activism. And they joined up with us, the Real Name campaign, to march in the streets downtown that afternoon. And it was really something to see. I've never seen high school students come out in those numbers against something like this. Especially not just in their schools, but they also went downtown and took to the streets afterwards. I mean, we blocked a major road, and I was trying to. I had some adults who were telling me, "Wow, we're a little nervous. We're blocking the street here." And then I went up to the banner carriers, who were these 4 high school students, and I was just checking in with them, making sure they're doing okay. I said, like, "Hey, what's going on here, y'all? Are y'all doing okay?" And they gave me this huge smile, and they were like, "Hell yeah, we're doing okay. Like, we're having the time of our lives here." And so, yeah, it was very empowering. Even though one bill did go through that year, we did stop almost every anti-LGBTQ bill, the medical ban that year and the Don't Say Gay bill.
Oh, that's fabulous. That's fabulous. So how do you approach, how do you get high school students to come out? How do you approach people? What's your tactic as an organizer, and what's your, what do you say to people to get them involved?
Well, I have to say, a lot of the high school students were doing their own organizing to start with, right? They were organizing these walkouts, and what we've done since they started organizing the walkouts is basically brought up to them, "Hey, you've got to keep this going, right? This can't just be a one and done. Of course, like, there might not be a walkout every single day. I mean, we'd love that, but it's the way to keep the movement going forward is to build an organization." And so what we've done is we've encouraged students to join with SDS, Students for Democratic Society, and at Ben Franklin High School, they've ever since doing walkouts this year, they've actually started an SDS chapter.
Oh, that's fabulous. That's really good. I want to pivot here a little bit. I know besides the the Real Name campaign, you're also a member of a Marxist-Leninist organization, the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. And I wanted to ask you, are those things that are those like two separate things, or as a LGBTQ activist, is that, why do you see it necessary to also be be a communist or be active in this other thing as well? And how do they fit together? Are they mutually exclusive, or are they similar?
Sure. I appreciate the question. So being a communist helps me realize why these anti-LGBTQ attacks are coming and who my friends are and who my enemies are to defeat them. So in the United States, I understand that we have a country that's run by monopoly capitalists, right? Huge corporations, banks, the Exxons, Amazon, Facebook, whatever, right? Huge corporations are running the United States, both parties in the United States. We also have a situation where U.S. monopoly capitalism and the U.S. empire really around the world is in decline. And it has been declining since the 1970s. You can see this decline in a lot of different ways. So the U.S. has been losing war after war around the world, right? In Vietnam and Afghanistan, the U.S. Economy is not growing as fast as it used to be growing. Manufacturing is rusting or moving away. And really importantly, the population, but in large part because of these things, the population is also set to decline. And the fertility rate has been going down since the 70s too. So these are the material conditions that we're dealing with, and this is the context for the struggles that we're facing, because what this is causing is polarization in the ruling class. And so the ruling monopoly capitalists, they have two basic different approaches for how to deal with how they're declining: the Republicans and the Democrats. And this polarization is basically them disagreeing more and more, or having conflicting ideas more and more as the decline is continuing more and more. And so the Republicans, they want to play hardball, right? They want to they want to roll back they want to roll back benefits and like social programs. They want to attack people's rights. And the reason why they're going after people's rights, the reason why they're going after specifically LGBTQ rights, is it's a program to restore what they call traditional family values. This like conservative idea of an American family where you have to have two straight parents, man, woman. They need to have as many kids as they can, and they need to marry and start having kids as young as they can. They need to, the man needs to go to work. The woman needs to stay at home in the house, take care of the house, take care of the kids. That's the ideal that they're pushing for by attacking LGBTQ rights. And it's also the ideal that they're pushing for by attacking abortion rights. And the reason they're doing this is because they want the working class in the United States to reproduce and to grow, because they want to put people in the United States to work for these corporations, so that these corporations can keep making money. And the more workers these corporations have, the more money they can make.
So controlling the number of people that are workers that are being reproduced. It is a similar thing with immigration, I think, right? People coming across. You want the border to be, fluid or cut off depending on, how many workers you need at a particular time. Or does that sound right? Or
yeah, and there's conflict there, right? Because there's a lot of the people on the Democrat side might claim to support immigration or take an easier line on it, and a lot of them want to increase the workforce by having immigrants to exploit. But the Republicans want to keep up a really sharp, very intense racism against Chicano people, against Latino people, Central Americans, Mexicans. So they don't want the immigration. So they have to find another way to be raising the population.
So let me go back then. So the Republicans, are repressive because they want to, they want this model of the family, in your view, that so that they can increase the number and the level of exploitation of workers. The Democrats, though, are also a party of the rich, of the ruling class, so how do they approach this question? And is that is it better for us? Is it how do you see that as an LGBTQ activist?
Yeah. So to go back to the Republicans for a quick minute, the policies that they're putting forward are not popular, right? Most Americans are for some kind of abortion rights. Most Americans oppose discrimination against LGBTQ people. Actually, most people in Louisiana oppose discrimination against LGBTQ people. So the Republicans try to get the upper edge in this polarized climate by rallying a base. So they appeal to the most conservative people possible to try to kind of like whip up some energy among like an extreme minority of people in their base to get the activists that they need to get an edge, right? And at the same time to please the monopoly capitalists. The Democrats, to answer your question, have the opposite problem. The Democrats have the base, right? The Democrats want women, want LGBTQ people to vote for them. As a matter of fact, a lot of corporations that support the Democrats, like Starbucks is a great example of this. Hotels, a good example too. These are corporations that support the Democrats. They want LGBTQ people and women to work for them because they have these majority women or majority LGBTQ workforces. So the Democrats can't be coming out against LGBTQ people and against women because they want to keep the votes. But on the other hand, they need to be pleasing the capitalists, right? So the Republicans have their program is very openly pro-capitalist. So, but they need to disguise it and wrap it up in some kind of evangelical, anti-trans, bigoted ideology to win over their base. The Democrats have the base, but they need to find a way to calm their base down enough so that they can still please the capitalists. So the Democrats are going to be they're going to claim to put out pro-women, pro-LGBTQ views, but they're not going to rock the boat, right? They're not going to do anything they're not going to push too hard to upset things, to upset the monopoly capitalist class. And what this is pretty much boiled down to, and what Louisiana is a great example of this polarized climate. Basically, the two parties have locked in their turfs and they've created two separate legal systems in this country. And Louisiana is on the way on the deep end Republican side of that. And the Democrats, if they're scared anywhere, they're definitely scared here to be rocking the boat. So they are, like I say, they are not going to fight for us until we fight them to make them. They're never going to really do anything to really stand up. So that makes it clear to me as a communist that our job in the FRSO, the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, and our job as any progressive people who really want to be defending LGBTQ rights and expanding them, our job is to mobilize the people, to be pushing the politicians and be putting demands on the politicians to win our democratic rights. Yeah, so that means protests, rallies, sit-ins, things like that. We need to have a real progressive pull to be doing this fight. I actually have a story on the abortion rights front that makes this point pretty clear if we have time.
No, go ahead. We got time.
So, we've also done most of our work is on LGBTQ issues, but We've also done some work to defend abortion rights. When decision day came out, the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. We led a march of 4,000 people in downtown New Orleans. It's the biggest march we've seen since Black Lives Matter in 2020, the Black Lives Matter uprising. And in this march, we demanded that the city of New Orleans become a sanctuary city for abortions. Now, the state of Louisiana has a trigger ban. This ban was put into place by a Democratic governor, and it was actually worsened by the current Democratic governor. This ban is a complete ban on abortion, including rape or incest, right? With no exceptions for rape or incest. So, in the city of New Orleans, we demanded that the DA, that the city council, that the sheriff, that the NOPD, that all of them commit to not prosecuting anybody for abortion, right? For trying to get an abortion, whatever means they choose to use to get an abortion. And we actually had the district attorney come to the march, and he asked me to speak, if he could speak, right? And so I told him, I'd be happy to have you speak if you agree to our demands. Now, the district attorney, Jason Williams, claims to be one of the most progressive district attorneys in the country. He's part of some kind of alliance of so-called progressive district attorneys, right? And so he comes up and he looks at my letter and he says, yeah, I'll endorse those demands. He comes up to the mic and he starts talking. And what he says is, oh my God, I support women. I support women so much. I even support LGBTQ people. I support people's right to choose. Y'all are great. This is democracy in action. And then he puts down the mic and takes a bow and gets off, and goes back to where he was in the crowd. And so I came up to the mic right after him, and I told him on the mic in front of the crowd, Jason Williams, you didn't answer my question. Are you going to support our demands? Are you going to agree to not prosecute abortions in the city of New Orleans? So he comes back up to the mic. And again, he says, oh my God, I love, you know how much I love women? I can tell you how much I love women. Oh, I support reproductive rights so much. And then what happened after that is the crowd started booing him and didn't let him get a word out. The crowd started jeering at him, right? This is a crowd of Democrats, right? Primarily, probably, right? Sure, and just like booing this Democratic politician and not letting him speak, not letting him get a word in until he said on the mic, and we got video of him. He said, okay, I will not prosecute abortions in the city of New Orleans. And that was the first time he came out saying that. Right. So we made that happen. And the way we made that happen is by fighting the Democratic Party. Right. And so it's only by building a mass movement that we can make the change.
Well, let me pivot here a little bit. You were just on a delegation of LGBTQ people to Cuba, and which is a socialist country. And you were there to investigate how things work in Cuba for women and LGBTQ people. Could you talk a little bit about what was that trip like, and what did you discover about the situation in Cuba, and how is it different than what you're seeing in Louisiana?
Sure. So first of all, Havana is exactly like New Orleans. The only difference between the four differences between Havana and New Orleans are the streets are a little bit better in Havana. The weather is a little bit cooler. They speak Spanish and they have socialism, right? And so in Cuba, it's at the front of the worldwide struggle against homophobia and transphobia. Every year, they have 16 working days against homophobia and transphobia. And this year, we went on a delegation to participate in those working days with them. And during these working days, the Center for National Sex Education, Serenas, puts out all kinds of educational materials, sex education, education on HIV, education on, just loving relationships, and the polyclinics throughout the country, the schools throughout the country, the media, everyone talks about it, distributes it, promotes discussion around LGBTQ people. And this year's delegation, this year's working days were particularly special because they followed the passage of the new Families Code in Cuba, which passed late last year. And the Families Code is this groundbreaking new law that, first of all, it formally legalizes same-sex marriage and adoption. But it does a lot more than that, right? It basically sets up the definition of the family so that it's centered around caring relationships. So if you're in court and you prove in court that someone has consistently taken care of you, or you've consistently taken care of someone else for an extended period of time, that's a family. You can claim that as a family. You can get all the government benefits that you would get from that being a family, and you can disprove that someone who's blood related to you is your family, which is like mind blowing and great for LGBTQ kids. And it's like just a couple miles away in Louisiana, we have like the opposite situation of our government just constantly attacking LGBTQ kids. The other thing that the Families Code introduces that's really important is it establishes these offices called Defense of the Family offices, where there's basically a team of lawyers and social workers who a child of any age can go up to and talk to them about their families, and they can make a claim about domestic abuse, about some kind of issue with custody, whatever. And the office is going to evaluate the child's maturity and evaluate the claim, based on the maturity. And it's this concept they call progressive autonomy, right? So the older you get, the more mature you are. It's not just this like break at 18 years old. And then so they can take the child's claim and bring it to court. So you can have a child who faces domestic abuse, and without having to go to a lawyer, without having to go to a district attorney, without having to go to the police, they can bring up this domestic abuse and file charges.
Wow. So let me ask you also, though, about, and first, that's impressive, this whole family code thing you just talked about. But I wanted to ask you also a little bit about healthcare in Cuba and how that affects, because I know it's an issue, some of the things you just talked about with healthcare for youth in Louisiana. But how does healthcare affect LGBTQ and women, for that matter, in Cuba? And what did you learn about their healthcare system while you were there?
Yeah, so it's important to recognize that Cuba is under conditions of blockade, right? The United States doesn't allow any medical supplies to enter the country from a foreign country. It doesn't allow any food or basic sanitation equipment, anything as basic as like toilet paper or menstrual care products. Nothing like that can go into the country, according to like the United States. But like despite that, Cuba produces 80% of its own pharmaceuticals. And it's actually developed a lung cancer vaccine, several vaccines against COVID, vaccines that actually can be stored at ambient temperatures, which is really important for developing nations, that they don't have to be like refrigerated or kept at a certain temperature. They've developed diabetes medications. And actually, we learned when we were there that if the U.S. had lifted its blockade on Cuba, the diabetes medication that they have would save the United States 10,000 amputations per year. So it's the people in the United States don't realize it, but we also lose out too from the blockade. So to answer your question, Cuba is very self-sufficient in terms of its medicine, and they make sure that there are doctors in every neighborhood, called these like family doctors, that you can go to if you want medical care. And then after going to the family doctor, you can go to a more specialized, if your problem's not solved there, you can go to a more specialized polyclinic, and then you can go to a more specialized hospital. And at every step of the way, I didn't mention this earlier when you asked about LGBTQ rights, trans healthcare is free in Cuba, up to and including surgeries. And it's been this way for about 20 years now. For actually, I think a little over 20 years, trans affirming surgeries have been free in Cuba. And it's been thanks to the work of LGBTQ activists, but also the Communist Party and the Serenas, the Center for National Sex Education, who all agree that this needs to be a priority.
Oh my gosh! Okay, so that's thank you for that. Could you talk a little bit also? I mean, you just mentioned the Serenas. I don't know if I said it right, but how do they deal with sex education? And I mean, you just told us they don't have it in Louisiana, but how do they deal with it in Cuba?
Sure. So they've got plenty of. When we went to visit the polyclinic, there were HIV posters everywhere, like posters that inform people about it, and these posters had nothing to do with LGBT identity, right? It didn't like scapegoat LGBTQ people, and HIV related sex education in Cuba hasn't scapegoated LGBTQ people like it has in the United States, right? So the Serenas, it directs it nationally, and it incorporates it at every level of Cuban society, in schools, in hospitals, and clinics. And they're constantly trying to like reevaluate it and revise it every day. They bring in experts from all around the world. They have different networks. We got to actually meet activists in the different networks of Serenas. There's a transgender network, lesbian and bisexual women's network, and men who love men network. And so they consult with these networks as well to revise their education programs. And so they make sure that everyone has it, and that everyone is able to see just like the most updated, high quality, world class education that you can have. And by the way, something I forgot to mention about the Families Code is the way that it was adopted. So the Families Code wasn't just some law like decreed by the Cuban government. It actually was approved, I think, in its 26th or 27th draft, and it was redrafted that many times because the code went to the people at a neighborhood level, and in their town halls, like the entire Cuban people, millions of them, came out and discussed and debated the code. And they actually amended, I think it was something like 49% of the original language of the law. So, this compared to like the kinds of laws we see in Louisiana that just come out of nowhere, that are not popular, and that, the right wing is just pushing to advance their political agenda, is just a world of difference.
So it sounds like there's what you're saying, it's a whole different level of democracy, where people, before something this important becomes a law, people, debate it in the neighborhoods across the whole country, and there's forums where they can actually put forward different revisions or whatever. Whereas here, you get maybe some, right-wing think tank like ALEC or whoever writes a bill, and people, lie about what's in it, and, whatever your district attorney says he supports it when he doesn't, and things like that. So it sounds like quite a different kind of setup. I want to, I mean, before I move on to, is there anything else you wanted to say about Cuba? It's things from your trip that impacted you, or that you saw that our Fight Back Radio listeners might be interested in?
Sure. So the one thing I want to emphasize is that Cuba has evangelicals. Cuba has conservatives. When I say it's like so similar to New Orleans, I really mean like they have the colonial history, right? They have the Catholic Church. So they have a lot of people who have backwards ideas on the LGBTQ community in the country. But what they don't have is a monopoly capitalist class and a billionaire funded Republican Party that's able to like that really wants to whip up these anti-trans, anti-LGBTQ ideas to mobilize people to spread hate, right? So they like because they don't have that, they're able to sort out these issues democratically. They're able to have these town halls, they're able to have a discussion, and they're able to move forward while still taking everyone's opinion into account. And so that's just really important. And that's because the working class in Cuba has the power, not the monopoly capitalists.
No, that's impressive. I want to again pivot, but it's for our Fight Back Radio listeners, besides you being a dynamic LGBTQ activist, you're also a labor leader in New Orleans as well. You just were one of the leaders of organizing the second Starbucks in New Orleans, and the first one that was majority black, as I understand it. Can you talk a little bit about why you and your coworkers voted to unionize and what that campaign looked like?
Sure. Yeah, of course. On Mardi Gras Day. So for anyone who's not familiar with it, New Orleans, every year we have a celebration on Mardi Gras, Fat Tuesday, where everybody just gets like super drunk and like goes to parades and whatever, right? But for service sector workers, for waiters, waitresses, cooks, baristas, bartenders, this is just the busiest time of the year. We're there overtime. We're just cranking out coffees nonstop for all these drunk tourists. And this past year's Mardi Gras, someone got in an argument with one of my coworkers, and actually, like, she wanted a certain amount of whipped cream on her drink, and the way that like he made it wasn't like exactly what she wanted or whatever. I don't remember the exact details, but she reached across the bar and tried to punch him over this like whipped cream, right? And
oh my God,
he basically just like had to like dodge her punch and like go to the back, like on this like bonkers, balls to the wall, super busy day, right? And later on, we found out that she had a friend in corporate, and our store tried to ban her, but we just mysteriously didn't get an approval or didn't hear back from corporate for months. And she just came back into the store a few weeks later, no problem. And so, we put two and two together pretty easily. That if corporate wants to overrule you banning a customer, if corporate wants to overrule your safety for whatever reason, they can. And besides that, our store has been making record profits throughout downtown New Orleans. Our stores in downtown, throughout downtown New Orleans. Other Starbucks have closed. So ours has been this year taking in all the tourism, right? All this money. And our store is originally like an office corner store. So it's like just basically attached to this like big office complex hotel building. And so it's really designed to just serve kind of like federal workers or lawyers who like come in and out, who go to work downtown. But we're dealing with more and more tourists every year. And at the same time as we're getting these record sales, Starbucks is cutting our hours. They're basically doing everything they can to cut corners and to not spend as much and to just work us harder while we are on the clock. So we have these like enormous volumes. We don't have the staff to deal with them. And so we have these, 30-minute, 40-minute, 50-minute wait times in the morning to get someone a latte, right? Or like a Danish or whatever. And lo and behold, people are going to get mad if they're waiting that long for a copy. And so we get even more aggression from people because of that. And so more unsafe working conditions. So we just said, we've had enough, where we're going to come together and we're going to unionize this store because we want a voice in our working conditions. We want to be able to stand up to Starbucks, and just not take everything that they're giving us lying down. And so we won. We organized very very stealthily. We gathered together our union cards without anyone knowing. It caught management completely off guard when we filed our petition, and the corporate had to basically scramble to put together an anti-union, any kind of anti-union drive against us.
Good work. Congratulations. No, that's fabulous. We're starting to run out of time, and I wish we did have more time. It's whatever, you're a labor leader, you're a socialist with international connections now, and LGBTQ activist, and there's a lot there. But before we finish the episode, I want to give you a chance, if there's anything we didn't talk about that you want to raise or underline, please tell our Fight Back Radio listeners.
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate the chance. I do want to say, I do want to bring up another quick story about Real Name Campaign. So right now, most of what we do is we defend against these anti-LGBTQ bills, but we actually started basically laying the foundations for an LGBTQ movement in the city before any of these bills and before any of these attacks came out. We were organized at first in 2019, and we organized to achieve name change accessibility in the city of New Orleans, the state of Louisiana. So for folks who don't know, for a transgender person, if you present your ID to a job or to a clinic or wherever, and it doesn't match what you look like or what your name is, what gender you look like, you could be discriminated against. You'd be outed as a trans person. You'd be discriminated against. So the way to address that is to be able to change your name and to be able to change your gender marker on your IDs, right? The gender marker is like the M or the F on an ID. So in the city of New Orleans in 2019, the cost of a name change was over $500. And in 2020, it climbed to $506. And by the way, the cost to change your name, if you're getting married and you want to change, if you're like a woman getting married, you want to change your maiden name to your husband's last name, is free, right? So the regular name change cost is a lot of people's rent or more than that, and then from getting married, it's free. So what we did is in 2020, when the unemployment benefits cutoff was coming closer, we realized that more and more trans people were worried about losing their jobs, and were worried about not being able to get jobs because they were on these unemployment benefits and they could be discriminated against when they try to enter the job market. So we launched a campaign. We held rallies. We held call-ins. And we targeted the civil court judges. But through our call-ins, we actually prevented them from having business for 2 full days because they had to pretty much disconnect their phone lines, close their computers to not answer their emails. And after that, the judges responded by lowering the name change fee by $256 down to $250. And I remember the week before they did that, I was in civil district court helping someone file a name change petition. And I was talking with the secretary who was there in front of me. And I was just trying to make some conversation. I was looking at this name change fee and I was saying, hey, this is a really high name change fee. You think they're ever going to cut it? And she looked at me funny. She told me, no, like, this is like, where do you think you are? This is the court. We have our fees. I know they're high, but they're not going down. If anything, they go up every year to match for inflation. And it's like, okay. And then after they cut it, a few weeks after that, I went back to help someone again file a name change petition. And I saw her there. And I said, hey, look at this $250 fee. This is pretty high. Do you think they're ever going to cut it? And she looked and she went, oh my gosh, it was, yeah, you were the one who said that. And she her face lit up. She says, yeah, wow, it's possible to change things. It's possible to change things for the better. And I think that's an important lesson, right? Like we can, if we mobilize, and if we fight, we can win. And another quick thing I'll say about the name change fee, they do raise these fees by 25 cents periodically to just, they say it's for whatever court costs, I don't know. And they do that several times a year. Since 2020, they haven't touched the 250 for a name change fee by 1 cent. They haven't raised it at all. And we say it's because they know we're going to go after them.
I think you're right. I think that's exactly right. Oh, great work. So, we'll put the Real Name Campaign, contact information in our show notes. So if people want to reach you, they can, through your link tree or through Instagram, Facebook, etc. We'll put all that into the show notes so people can find you there. But thank you so much for being our guest on Fight Back Radio.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Anyone in New Orleans here listening, subscribe to Fight Back Radio and follow Real Name Campaign, even if you're not in New Orleans. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, and all the links are going to be in the show notes.
So thank you, Serena Sojic-Borne. Excellent interview. I hope people got something out of that. I'm sure you did if you listened to it. I want to remind people to go back and listen to Eliza Schultz's interview to hear a Teamster perspective on LGBTQ as well. Also, I want to encourage people, if you're interested in digging deeper into this issue, there's the original. I think the original or one of the most important early 19th century documents about the theories of family was written by Frederick Engels. It's called The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State. And I'd encourage people to go back and dig into that. It's a pamphlet. It's probably a little over 100 pages. But it digs into the relationships of how family and how ruling classes use family. And Serena touched on some of this, and I think a deeper dive into that for those of you that are interested. Also, our friends at Red Menace just did a 2-part series on this. If you read it, if you want to go back and listen to their podcast, I would encourage that as well. Finally, celebrate Pride. Go to a parade. Have some fun. Be proud of who you are, but remember the struggle. It's like what Serena pointed out, our enemies are for real, and we can't take them for granted. Also promote Fight Back Radio. Give us 5 stars. Write a review for it, a thumbs up, depending on whatever platform you are, because this helps people find us. But what helps people find us even more is if you tell them about it and tell them to check out Fight Back Radio. If you get a tweet from us, retweet it. My friend always says retweets are better than likes, so I'll say that. And then finally, I just want to thank our production team again, who make this all happen. Natalie Pranis, Dodd McColgan, Shane Tremley, and Vince Olson. They make this all happen. For our entire Fight Back Radio team, I'm Richard Berg saying until next time, all power to the people.